Okay, bonjour à tous. Good afternoon. I'm here with my colleague, Carolyn Bennett, who's the Associate Minister of Health and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Je vais prendre un moment pour parler des inquiétudes entourant l'aide médicale à mourir. Nous le savons tous, l'aide médicale à mourir est un enjeu sensible, complexe et profondément personnel. Comme gouvernement, il faut s'assurer que nos lois évoluent avec les besoins des Canadiens, protègent les plus vulnérables et appuient l'autonomie et la liberté de choix. We have heard concerns of Canadians and experts about whether the healthcare system will be ready to accommodate MAID requests for persons whose sole medical condition is a mental illness by March 17th, 2023. This is a very complex question. Many are concerned about how this will impact them and their loved ones. Mon collègue, le ministre Duclos et Santé Canada, ont collaboré étroitement avec les provinces, les territoires et leurs communautés médicales afin de préparer l'évolution de l'aide médicale à mourir. Les progrès sur ce front sont significatifs. Nous sommes en bonne voie de finaliser les standards nationaux sur l'aide médicale à mourir pour les personnes qui souffrent d'un désordre mental comme seul critère. Ils seront prêts avant la limite de mars. We also know that some provinces, territories, and those working in the healthcare system say that more time is needed. That includes having the time to implement those practice standards and to complete and disseminate key resources that are being developed for clinicians and other healthcare system partners to address these more complex MAID requests. Nous sommes conscients du travail en cours au comité spécial mixte pour l'aide médicale à mourir et attendons son rapport final en février 2023. Le rapport final du panel d'experts sur l'aide médicale à mourir et les désordres mentaux, reçu cet été, nous a aussi fourni plusieurs considérations et recommandations. C'est important d'avoir le temps d'examiner attentivement ces deux rapports. Celui que nous avons déjà et celui que nous recevrons en février. Together, I believe those two reports will provide strong guidance on complex questions relating to MAID in Canada beyond eligibility for persons with a mental illness. We are not making this decision in a vacuum. We are listening to what we are hearing and being responsive to make sure we move forward in a prudent way. We know we need to get this right in order to protect those who are vulnerable and also to support an individual's autonomy and freedom of choice. For these reasons, today we are letting Canadians know that our government intends to work with our parliamentary colleagues in the House and Senate to negotiate an extension of the March 17th, 2023 eligibility date. This will require legislation. Je vais répéter en français. C'est pourquoi nous annonçons aujourd'hui aux Canadiens notre intention de travailler avec nos collègues de la Chambre et du Sénat afin de négocier une extension de la date d'éligibilité le 17 mars. Nous devons légiférer. Une extension de la date limite va nous permettre d'être sûrs que le système de santé est prêt à évaluer et administrer l'aide médicale à mourir dans ces cas complexes. Surtout, de le faire de manière respectueuse, sécuritaire et cohérente partout au Canada. This work will begin in the new year. Right now, we want all Canadians to know, especially those exempted by the current exemption of eligibility from MAID, that we plan to take this next step. This is a top priority for our government, and we want to reassure Canadians that we are committed to ensuring that our laws protect everyone while supporting the autonomy and freedom of choice that are central to Canada's MAID regime. Je veux rassurer les Canadiens. Nous allons continuer de protéger les plus vulnérables tout en assurant leur droit à l'autonomie et leur liberté de choisir. Merci. Thank you. I'm now happy to take your questions, beginning with questions pertaining to MAID.
And we'll take questions in the room first. If you're online and you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand function to notify us of a question if we have time. S'il vous plaît, si vous êtes en ligne et vous voulez poser une question, utilisez la fonction lever la main pour nous en aviser.
Hey there, David Baxter with Global News. As you're working forward, what protections and safeguards are you going to have in place for people suffering mental illness who may be looking for aid? Because, of course, suicidal ideation may just also be a symptom of someone experiencing mental illness.
That's a good question. I think it's clear that if you're thinking about suicide, that this is not a reason to get medically assisted medical assistance in dying. It's clear in the expert report that that's not what this is about. That we're talking about mental disorders that are evaluated over a much longer period of time with a greater degree of expertise. I want to reassure Canadians that if you're thinking about suicide, you should get help. But the MAID regime is not there for that. That's something else. I don't know if, Carolyn, you want to add to that?
Yes, I think the expert panel made it clear that the safeguards in place now are pretty well the same safeguards that would be needed for mental illness because it is not suicide. But what they are recommending is that in the assessor process, that a psychiatrist would be part of any assessment team to make sure that this is indeed because of mental illness and not suicidal ideation.
And just on trying to get the new legislation passed, of course, the House has now risen. It's not coming back until January 30th. That leaves just over a month's time to actually pass this new legislation, negotiate with the other parties. What is this work going to look like over the next few weeks? Because it's a very, very short time until you hit that March deadline.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a good question. We have only to negotiate an extension. So the only part of the legislation will be an extension to the coming into effect, or the coming into effect of the regime, or the devolution of the sunset clause. So that's all we're doing here. The regime will come into place at the end of that time period. So we're just seeking to move that time period back. We have begun to have discussions informally. I'm not going to negotiate in the public sphere right now, but we do think that there's widespread support amongst parliamentarians in both houses to move prudently. We've heard Canadians, we've heard our parliamentary colleagues and others, and we think that we can get this done.
Hi, Minister Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News. To when would this be delayed to? Is it indefinite? What kind of time frame are you looking at here?
Again, I'm not going to commit to a particular period of time. I want to speak with my parliamentary colleagues first. There are a number of people in Canada, including the chair of the expert committee, Dr. Mona Gupta, working with her colleagues across Canada, who feel that clinicians are ready. Feel that clinicians are ready to move forward now with the March 23rd deadline. There are others who've expressed concerns and would like a short delay. So I'm not going to commit to a particular period of time. We do have to respect decisions of the courts. They have said that medical assistance in dying is a right that Canadians have, and so the process will continue to move forward, but we're going to do it in a measured and prudent way, as we have done from the beginning, and we will see what the fruit of those negotiations will be.
And is there a chance that medical aid in dying for mental health reasons won't happen?
I think that would that would require a very different piece of legislation. Right now, what we're doing is delaying the coming into force after a sunset clause. That would require a very different piece of legislation, and I think that would run us afoul of the courts.
Hi, Catherine Levesque, National Post. Just in terms of the timeline, so just to be clear, so I understand there's going to be a bill to amend the legislation. Are you intending on waiting till the special joint committee tabled its final report to do that, or might it happen when the House comes back?
Well, as I mentioned in the prepared text, this will actually give the special joint committee more time to. They still have their deadline, but it will give us more time to incorporate anything that they might have said. about mental illness as a sole criterion for people seeking MAID. All this will do is push back the coming into force of the possibility of seeking MAID with mental illness as a sole criterion. It won't affect the timelines of the committee, but will give us additional time to see what the committee has said and see if there's any additional guidance that they want to add in the course of their deliberations.
So just to be crystal clear, you could table legislation as soon as the House comes back.
That's correct. Yeah. Remember, all this legislation is doing is delaying the coming into effect of the sunset clause.
And I just had a question for Minister Bennett. I was just wondering if you shared any of the concerns from the opposition in terms of the safeguards right now for people who would be seeking MAID who have a mental disorder.
I think that the expert panel was very clear that the safeguards that are in place now in the legislation are excellent. What is now being drafted by the expert panel in a small group is practice guidelines, and with the practice guidelines will come the need for training, education, and being able to make sure people understand what those guidelines are in terms of the questions, in terms of how you train somebody to do that assessment for something that is solely for a medical illness. I think that there is very clear, I think, consensus. This would be very rare. That the assessment may be pending over a long period of time, a number of different assessments, and so I think that I have been reassured by Dr. Gupta and many others that the safeguards are in place and they are very strong.
Stephanie Levitz, the Toronto Star. The New Democrats have already said that they would support probably some kind of extension, and it would be in exchange for the government implementing greater supports and greater access to services, because, you know, we understand that the wait times, for example, to seek psychiatric or psychological care can be quite long, and there's concern that people seek to avail themselves of MAID in the interim while they're waiting to see help. So I guess I wonder if, as part of the healthcare funding talks, there are talks in turn then to increase the cash flow to provinces tied specifically to providing supports around medical assistance in dying.
Probably a question best addressed either to Minister Bennett or Mr. Duclos, and I'll turn the mic over to Minister Bennett in a second. But what I would say is we have, as a government, invested massively already in mental health and in supporting the provinces and territories in that regard. It falls under healthcare falls under provincial jurisdiction. And I would also take this moment to repeat, given the way you framed your question, that the safeguards that are put in place for whatever reason one seeks MAID doesn't mean that it's just a choice that one can make lightly. There have to be medical evaluations. You have to fit within the criteria. Yes, it's a personal choice that one makes in collaboration with one's doctor, and it's a very personal choice and a very difficult choice. But it isn't just the case that you can, I want to assure Canadians that it isn't just the case that you can walk off the street and seek MAID if you're feeling depressed or and you should be seeking help. Absolutely. But it isn't the case, as Minister Bennett has pointed out, as the expert committee has said in its report, that this will be anything but a rare or infrequent practice after a long period of treatment. And so I just want to reassure you, and I want to reassure Canadians, but I'm happy to turn over the rest of the question to Minister Bennett.
As you know, the $5 billion that was in the 2017 bilateral agreements with all the provinces and territories continues in terms of about $600 million a year, really up to 2027. But in budget 2021, there was over $13 million dedicated for provinces to make sure that they could adequately implement MAID. And so I think that, again, these conversations are ongoing. We know we have work to do on social determinants of health, on poverty and housing. We know we've got work to do on palliative care. And I think the Pain Task Force has done a very good job in explaining what we need to be doing sort of better in terms of practitioners understanding pain. But I think that this is something that we will work with the provinces and territories to make sure this is done properly.
This is my follow-up to Minister Lametti. I think, what changed for you? It seems as though you've been pretty resolute up until 4 o'clock this afternoon that this March deadline was going ahead. So I'm wondering, was there a tipping point, a story you heard, something that made you think, no, we're going to go ahead and try and get this extension?
Well, I think I've been listening. Certainly, if you saw my committee appearance last week, I was open to listening to my colleagues who were asking the various questions in that context. I have been watching. We have been, obviously, we've come through a period where there's been a pandemic, and certainly that has created challenges in the healthcare system. We've been watching, Minister Duclos has been working very carefully with provincial and territorial counterparts on the implementation of this. We've had the expert report. And I think it is about making sure that everybody's ready. So some clinicians, for example, in Dr. Gupta's view, are ready. They have dealt with these kinds of illnesses for years. It's their area of expertise, and this would be another tool in their toolkit. But not everybody's ready. We need in order for this to work and for Canadians to be on the same page at the same time. We need the didactic materials to be ready. We need people's, I suppose, attitudes to be aligned about their readiness. And so I think at the end of the day, we want to be prudent. We want to move in a step-by-step way so that we don't make mistakes. And so at the end of the day, it was an evolution.
Valérie Bain de Radio-Canada. Donc, peut-être répéter en français le combien de temps vous pensez avoir besoin pour cette extension-là, mais aussi, est-ce que vous allez en profiter pour encadrer le volet des demandes anticipées, par exemple, des gens qui viennent d'apprendre aujourd'hui qui ont l'Alzheimer, mais que ce n'est pas aujourd'hui qu'ils voudraient demander l'aide médicale à mourir, mais plus tard, parce que ça aussi, ça reste à être géré.
Ce qu'on propose de faire est uniquement de prolonger l'entrée en vigueur du régime pour les désordres mentaux. C'est tout ce qu'on va faire ici. On n'a pas beaucoup de temps, évidemment. La date limite, le 17 mars 2023. Il faut que je cherche l'appui de mes collègues parlementaires pour s'assurer que ça va, parce qu'il faut un projet de loi, et donc il faut s'assurer qu'un projet réussisse. Donc, pour les demandes par anticipation, c'est l'un des sujets que le comité parlementaire doit aborder. Et donc, nous attendrons leur rapport. Ils sont en train de faire beaucoup de travail là-dessus. Et donc, les prochaines étapes vont être à suivre, si on veut, mais il faut absolument regarder ce que le comité va faire, ce que le comité va suggérer, et il faut évaluer après.
Répondez à ma première question, l'extension, la prolongation, est-ce que vous avez une idée de combien de temps vous demandez?
Je ne me suis pas prononcé là-dessus par exprès. Évidemment, c'est quelque chose qu'on doit regarder avec nos collègues parlementaires. Comme j'ai disais tantôt, il y a certains experts dans le domaine, comme la Dr Gupta à Montréal, en travaillant avec ses collègues à travers le Canada, qui pensent qu'ils sont prêts déjà. Mais ils sont très expérimentés dans le domaine et ils sont prêts. Mais il y a d'autres, certaines provinces et certains administrateurs des écoles de médecins à travers le Canada qui ont exprimé leurs inquiétudes. Et donc, on veut être prudent et on va trouver une période de temps où on va s'assurer que tout le monde soit prêt en même temps.
Étant donné qu'on sait déjà que ça fait un moment qu'il faut travailler là-dessus, comment se fait-il? Comment est-ce que vous expliquez, vous, comment est-ce qu'on vous explique que, par exemple, les écoles de médecine ne soient pas prêtes comme Dr Gupta que vous nous citez depuis tout à l'heure?
ça prend du temps pour disséminer les pratiques, l'information. Et donc, c'est un processus. Nous allons nous assurer que on va embarquer avec la prochaine étape quand tout le monde soit prêt. Et comme j'ai dit, nous avons écouté les Canadiens et les Canadiennes et certaines personnes qui ont exprimé des inquiétudes et nous sommes en train de juste ralentir le processus pour nous donner un peu plus de temps.
Première question en ligne ira à Hélène Buzetti. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, monsieur. J'aimerais seulement revenir à une des questions que mon collègue a posées. Après Noël, il y a seulement 4 semaines de travaux parlementaires avant le deadline du 17 mars. Alors, j'aimerais savoir, en un si court laps de temps, avez-vous déjà des appuis auprès des autres partis qui vous permettent de croire qu'on va pouvoir adopter ça avant le 17 mars?
Merci Hélène pour la question. Évidemment, je ne vais pas négocier dans la place publique, mais je peux vous assurer que nous avons déjà commencé des discussions. Vous avez déjà vu lors des comités des personnes des autres partis qui se sont exprimées là-dessus déjà en faveur d'une extension. Donc, je suis confiant qu'on va y arriver dans le temps qu'on a.
Croyez-vous que, par exemple, un bâillon sera nécessaire pour faire aller les choses plus vite? Puis il y a le Sénat aussi, j'imagine, qui devra accepter ça. Avez-vous les appuis là-bas nécessaires?
Nous avons, comme j'ai dit, on a commencé les conversations déjà et je suis confiant qu'on va y arriver avec la Chambre et avec le Sénat.
Prochaine question. Next question will be Lisa Johnson. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is about an announcement we heard from Alberta's Justice Minister Tyler Shandro this morning. Minister Shandro announced that the province is planning to take over the responsibility of prosecuting under the Firearms Act through its Crown prosecutors. I'm wondering what your reaction is to that announcement.
Well, we've seen the announcement. It's, as you've said, it's just happened, and I've just gotten a letter, an uncharacteristically short letter, from my counterpart, and I suppose we're trying to understand it. Criminal code firearms offenses are already prosecuted by provincial prosecutors for the most part across Canada, and so. We're not sure if he means that. Under the Firearms Act, that's something that falls under federal jurisdiction to delegate, and we've delegated that power as a federal government to the Federal Prosecution Service. So more needs to be known about how they plan to proceed. But we're studying it, and we'll hope to get that other information.
Follow up.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and in the other kind of second piece to that announcement as well was that the minister has released new protocols for Alberta Crown prosecutors, advising them that it will generally not be in the public interest to proceed with the prosecution of a charge of a possession of a banned firearm if the accused bought the firearm legally before May 1st, if the firearm was reclassified as prohibited as of May 1st, 2020, and if the accused has not been charged with anything else related to their possession of the firearm. So I'm wondering, what effect do you see that having and what your reaction is to that?
Well, the Criminal Code falls under federal jurisdiction. The Firearms Act is a federal statute, and the courts have held that firearms regulation falls under federal jurisdiction. I would expect, as is the case with all other criminal code provisions and federal criminal statutes, that police officers will enforce the law, and prosecutors, and it is mainly, as I've said, provincial prosecutors across Canada, members of the provincial crowns, who prosecute those offenses. It would be extraordinary if they made a unilateral decision not to enforce the law. That would not only offend the Constitution, but would also offend the rule of law.
And the last question we'll take in the room.
Hi, Minister. I wanted to ask you about this firearm stuff as well. It sounds like you're saying that you can't believe what Alberta is doing. Are you prepared for federal legal action if they do, in fact, tell their prosecutors not to enforce federal gun laws?
For now, I'm saying I'm not quite understanding what Alberta is proposing to do. So I'm going to wait and see what kind of further information they might provide.
Do you think it's political grandstanding then by the Alberta Justice Minister?
Well, I'm not certain. To be perfectly honest with you, as I said, the constitutional division of powers is quite clear. Certain things fall under federal jurisdiction, other things fall under provincial jurisdiction, other things fall under shared jurisdiction. And traditionally, it has been the courts who have determined in Canada when either the federal government or provincial government has crossed the line on jurisdiction, and it's common for one jurisdiction to challenge legislation from the other, saying they've gone too far. It is somewhat unique for a jurisdiction to redelegate something that, if this were the case, that might offend the Constitution. So I'm going to say that in principle, the federal government tries to stick to its lanes, whether it's on this or any other matter. We do make an effort to stay within federal jurisdiction, and we've had some success with that jurisdiction being upheld in the courts, and we expect the provinces to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci tout le monde.